Power sector workers on Wednesday made good their threat to embark on a nationwide strike, shutting down power stations countrywide and setting off another electricity grid collapse. But after throwing the entire nation into a total blackout for several hours, with its attendant loss of productivity, which may have run into billions of naira, the workers suspended the industrial action by 2 weeks. It came after a 4-hour conciliation meeting between the federal government and the striking electricity workers in Abuja with the Minister of Labour and Productivity, Dr. Chris Ngige, representing the government. This latest move by the electricity workers to hold the whole nation to ransom has been criticized by citizens who feel that they should have looked for a better way to press home their demands rather than shutting down power stations across the country. Joining us on this show this morning, as we discuss the implications of the one-day strike by TCN workers, is Ekpo, former National Commissioner of the National Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, alongside Sunday Odunton, Executive Director, Association of Nigerian Electricity Distributors. Welcome to the morning show. Ekpo, good to see you. And Chief Sunday Odunton, welcome also to the morning show. Well,
thank you very much.
Let's start the conversation by having your take on the strike by the electricity workers. Hey, Ekpo, I saw your tweets. You think that this was an act of sabotage? It was an act of impunity. You accused Joe Ajero, the General Secretary of NUEE, of narcissistic megalomania, which was the phrase you used. And you were even recommending in your tweets that he should have been arrested because what he has done is an act of sabotage. And then we have Chief Odunton. Both of you are lawyers. Okay, what has happened? Is it illegal? What's your take? Let me start with you. Eyo Olagoke Ekpo.
Thank you, Ruben.
Yes.
Well, so speaking as a lawyer, it's pretty straightforward. We have a law in our books called the Trade Disputes Essential Services Act. It's a 46-year-old piece of legislation. And it's very clear. Certain services, certain activities are regarded as essential to the lifeblood of our socioeconomic life as a country. And one of those is electricity. I'm sure those who run the NUEE, Ajero and Co., are fully aware of this. And in spite of that, they went ahead to do what it is that they have done. We have laws on, for example, terrorism and economic sabotage. When you act in this manner, you can, if you want to be extreme, and I wouldn't even say it's extreme, define it as economic sabotage. You can also define it as an act of terrorism. People have been dealt with for doing a lot less. So I don't think it's really arguable that what occurred on Wednesday, particularly given the reasons that were stated in writing by the leader of the NUE, Mr. Joe Ajero, are tenable and can be defined as anything but criminal in nature.
Well, Chief Sunday Odunton, do you agree with your Ekpo?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruben Sunday Abatu. I agree 100% with my brother, Eyo Olagoke Ekpo. What happened really embarrassed us as Disco. Even up till yesterday evening, we were still receiving calls, people telling us, why did we do that? Let me make it very clear to those who may not understand the value chain. We have generation companies, transmission companies, and distribution companies. And when it comes to switching light on and off, they've done the transmission company of Nigeria. And that's exactly what they did. And by doing that, they plunged the whole country into darkness. They also embarrassed us as distributors of these products because once they switch off, there's nothing to distribute. And I don't think that is the way to go. On the other hand, I would also like to call on the government to also do everything to avoid future occurrence of this kind of embarrassing national situation.
Right. I'll start from you, sir. Embarrassing national situation. But if you watched the show yesterday, there was a back and forth between Dr. Sam Amadi and the leader of the NUEE, that's Mr. Joe Ajero. And the back and forth was the fact that Mr. Joe Ajero got a good deal against the federal government. In fact, that was what Mr. Sam Amadi said, and to the detriment of other players in the sector. I mean, what would you like to say about even the privatization process and that deal? And I'd like to take Mr. Ekpo's insights too on this. First, I'm coming to you, sir, Mr. Sunday Oduto. What's your take about that conversation?
Well, thank you very much, Rufai. It only confirmed what Annette has been saying over the years. We've been talking about the issue of misalignment of the value chain. You cannot continue to have a value chain where generation is largely private, distribution is 50% private, 40% government. But the one in the middle, Transmission Company of Nigeria, very problematic, but it remains 100% in the hand of the federal government. And we have said it on the 5th of August, Friday, the 5th of August. I was on a Rise News night in Abuja where I said, if you have a child, a problematic son at home, and the child is very problematic, sometimes in the night, this child will go into the kitchen, steal meat from the pot of soup, while the parents were asleep. The best thing for the parent to do, two options, is that you give up that child for adoption so that somebody else can manage this child properly. But if you don't want to lose the child, you still want to be the parents, take the child to a boarding house. In other words, what we're saying is that it is time for the federal government to think about giving up the Transmission Company of Nigeria from this same old NEPA setup and let it be managed by private sector. You can go abroad, invite people abroad if you don't want local investors. But the point is still that we cannot continue to run the system the way it is. And the issue of alignment, you cannot continue to be held to ransom by just one of the three, or two of the three, or even the three. The whole value chain needs to be aligned. You cannot continue to have a country where you will be able to generate certain amount of electricity, but you cannot even wheel it to the point of distribution. So both the generation, transmission, and distribution need to be aligned, both technically and commercially. And the issue of NUI, well, again, I'll still put the blame on the doorstep of the government. It is about the way government does their own business. Because I don't think it is normal for whatever reason for the union to just say, switch off the light, the whole country. And Nigeria lost billions of naira within that period, within that short period. And they have even threatened that they'll go ahead and do the same thing if their demands are not met. I think it is time for government to act. I think it is time for us to all look at the whole thing and see how best we can give Nigerian electricity, which is what Nigerians want.
All right, Mr. Ekpo, your take on this?
Well, look, I don't know what Sam Amadi said yesterday, but if he talked about the privatization, I would say that the NUE's members, the electricity workers, are so far in the last 9 or so years since the privatization took place, the only beneficiaries of this. They did the same thing in 2013, held the entire country to ransom, and insisted that before any handover could be done to the core investors who succeeded in winning bids for these distribution companies, they would have to be paid off. So what you would have found is that most of the proceeds of privatization in 2013 were actually paid directly to the workers. Not only did they insist on being paid this, they also insisted, interestingly, that they would end their employments as government employees the day before the takeover, and then they would be automatically employed the next day. So there was never any situation in which these new owners had the opportunity to even look at the entire 40-something thousand, or rather 30-something thousand workers in the discos at that time right? And determine which of them they wanted, which is, of course, the right of any employee, particularly as they've been paid off. So you find out that this is a playbook that has been used time and time and time again, blackmailing the Nigerian nation, blackmailing the government, just to have a way for a very narrow, selfish interest. So this is something that I think needs to stop, and we need to call the bluff. But of course, we know that what these unions often do, particularly the NUE, which seems to be an outlier in its misbehavior, quite frankly, is to hold the country to ransom and play on the fact that essentially many of us in Nigeria regard our government as unpopular, and they play on this quite a lot. But really, as Sunday has said, we need to call the NUE and other unions that behave like it to order. There is on our books, somewhere in the Ministry of Labor, somebody called the Registrar of Labor Unions. It's his job to actually look at how these unions behave. There is a procedure to be followed before a union decides to embark on an industrial action. And such industrial action can only take place in the interest of its workers. I stand to be corrected, but I do not see how the interest of promoting, I don't know how many, 50, 100, even 1,000 people in TCN weighs over and above that of the 12 million customers who are connected to the grid and have customers totaling perhaps, 70, 80 million. How that interest of less than 1,000, perhaps even less than 100 people outweighs that of the country. I don't understand how we can be told that because some people who were laid off and have not been able to prove that they were actual employees of the PHCN 9 years ago and have not been paid. Now, let's understand something here. Ajero says that some workers have not been paid. There were 47,000 workers who were paid off, as I said earlier on, total, not just in distribution, but also in transmission and in generation, total about 47,000 who were paid off in 2013 from the proceeds of privatization. They were required to prove that they actually exist as workers biometrically. The few who could not are the reason now, today, 9 years later, why Ajero is shutting up the grid and shutting down the nation. I don't understand how we can sit by and look at this. And I would rather call on the Ministry of Labor to actually stop mollycoddling unions like the NUE and deal with them the way they should be dealt with. How did they get the money for these things? How did they manage their accounts? Ajero himself and his union took out of the proceeds of these payments that were made to workers. How was that money accounted for? How was it used? We were told maybe 7, 8 years ago that Ajero was using the money to build a hotel for on behalf of the workers or the members of the NUE. Is that what the mandate of the NUE is? To take money from your members and build hotels? So we need to take the fight, as it were, to these unions and stop allowing them to blackmail us as a country. There are laws on hand, quite a number of them, that stop this kind of behavior, and I think they should be deployed effectively against unions like this. I'm not saying that the workers of the NUE may not have had good reason to embark on some kind of industrial action, but if the reasons are what we have seen on record, written under the hand of Ajero, then of course those reasons certainly do not in any way override the interests of us as a country, of our economy and our societal cohesion, and our dependence on the grid for providing us with electricity. So really, I don't see how anything that may have happened or may not even have happened during the privatization could actually now be justifying this kind of actions. And I want us to be clear about this. This is something that has happened time and time again. I've been interacting with Ajero since 2002, 20 years now. And this is the same playbook that he keeps on using. And really, I think that this kind of behavior really needs to be brought under control and kept in check.
Okay, Ekpo, let's stay with this, your argument a little bit. You made the point about omissions on the part of the National Union of Electricity Employees. But some people have argued that we're also dealing with complacency, failure on the part of government at two levels. One, the privatization process. Government gave sweeter deals, didn't negotiate properly. Do you share that view? Secondly, an NGO called CASA, Citizens Group for Advocacy of Rights or whatever, they issued a statement yesterday saying that the NUEE and the other senior Staff Association of Allied Electricity Workers, that they have violated Section 31(6) of the Trade Unions Act. Maybe that's what you are referring to. But NUEE insists, through Joajero, that notice was served as far back as May. That in May, there was a warning notice to government to address the grievances of the electricity employees. The government did nothing. Was it right for government also to just ignore that notice, only to wait till a strike was called on August 17 before bringing up issues about, the propriety of the electricity employees going on strike?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Ruben, to take the first point you made about privatization, I'd really like to understand what exactly was not properly negotiated by the federal government. Don't forget, there were two sets of privatizations here. One on the generation side and one on the distribution side. Two different sets of incidents. And as far as I can tell, I was actually involved in that as a commissioner in NERC. Even though the aftermath, the result of it is something that I think we all agree has turned out to be suboptimal. In terms of the process itself and the outcome, that was exactly what happened, the way the process was meant to go. And I believe that at the time, in fact, in this very hotel where I'm sitting, in the Hilton, the process was actually televised live. And the steps that were taken before that day when the bidders were unveiled, the successful bidders were unveiled, was itself also transparent and openly conducted. So there's a whole bunch of agreements that were entered into between the core investors for the generating companies, the new owners, and the core investors for the distribution companies, followed by various regulatory steps that were taken by NERC at the time to make sure that at least we try to create a situation where the outcome of this privatization would be beneficial to Nigerians. Of course, it hasn't gone as expected, but in terms of the process itself, I really like to understand what exactly is the complaint. So that's the much I would say on that. On the second point, there are a number of laws that have been contravened by the NUEE. The most important one and the bottom line here is that electricity is regarded by law in this country for the last 46 years as an essential service in which workers are not enabled or permitted to go on strike in the way that they have gone on strike. That's point one. Point two is that even if you do have a right to go on strike, do you also have a right to, as it were, destroy where you work? Do you have a right to attack your colleagues who decide that they want to stay on at work? Don't forget, membership of a trade union is today voluntary and it has been so for almost a decade. Nobody that is employed in any electricity company is by virtue of that employment also automatically a member of a trade union as it used to be in the past. Now, there were a number of workers, workers of staff of TCN who chose to go to work and remain at work. Not everybody in TCN is a member of the NUE. Why attack them? That's one. Even if you do have a right to walk away, and that's what an industrial action is really about, it is to walk away from your place of employment and not report for duty. Does that also carry with it a right to do what they did, what we all saw, shut down the national grid, effectively create a system collapse, attack the economy of the country? Do we know the extent of the damage that was done to the machines? To the discos, how much they lost, to our economy, to those who depend on this, to our societal, to those of us in society, in our residences, in schools, in hospitals, in universities? Is that part of permissible industrial action? I don't think so. So this agency, this NGO that has said that they contravene the law, I believe that they are correct, even though I'm not sure about what the Trade Unions Act says, but I do know that the Trade Disputes Essential Services Act and the Trade Disputes Act itself, which actually regulates the manner in which a trade union can legitimately carry on a trade dispute, is totally against what happened on Wednesday. And I don't think it's really something that we should argue about, quite frankly. Again, it speaks to the impunity of the NUE, which, to my mind, has been recorded over the last 20 years. We've seen how they have consistently tried to use their being a union in an essential service to essentially achieve what are dishonorable means, political ends, which have nothing to do with trade disputes or legitimate trade disputes that they may have on behalf of their workers. And at the end of the day, how many workers are we really talking about here that are affected by these things that were stated? 1,000? 2,000, 3,000, 4,000? Does that number override the interest of us as Nigerians? Again, I don't think so. So I looked at from whatever angle you may wish to look at it. I do not know that we can properly and honestly and legitimately say that what these people did, what Joe Ajero himself has instigated, and I want to make this point very, very clear. We're not talking about the NUEE here. More often than not, we're talking about an individual who has total control of a trade union and has had total control of that trade union for the last 10, 12 or so years, and uses it for his own ends. And let's be very, very clear about this. I want to call a spade and not an agricultural instrument here. This is not really the NUE. This is Joe Ajero trying to achieve political ends. And I think that the NLC has to come out and tell us as Nigerians whether they actually support this activity of the affiliate union, or, and if they do not, what they intend to do about it. So I don't know, Ruben, but you know, I can't see how, honestly speaking, this kind of behavior can be justified for any reason at all, no matter how some of us may think that the government itself may, and I believe that the government, of course, is to blame. I do agree. This action was telegraphed. People knew about it, and yet they sat back and did nothing. People in our security agencies, people in the Ministry of Labor, people in the Attorney General's office. I remember, Ruben, when I was in charge of power sector reform in the BP in 2001 to 2003, this same NUEE threatened to actually attack the federal government and shut down the country because they did not like the fact that the reform process was on. I, as head of the reform team, went to Nasir Rufai and said, look, we can't sit back and let this happen. So we sued the NUEE. We actually sued, went to court. We preempted their strike action. I remember that in December 2001, the General Secretary then, Mr. Precious Kirikalio, with one single memo, raised 22 million naira by levying every member of the union, 22,000 people, 1,000 naira each, raised money to fight the federal government. We went to court and we obtained a court order saying very clearly that it is not the place of a trade union to use an ostensible trade dispute for political ends. It is also not the place of a trade union to attack what is a policy decision of the federal government. Trade unions exist only to protect the interest, the physical working conditions of their members, ensure that their members are treated right in their places of work, but not to use trade unionism for political purposes. So really, I think we should challenge the NLC to come up with a clear justification, at least a clear statement of the behavior of the NUEE. And if it is not justified, then they have to sanction Mr. Ajero in some way or the other. But I'm not holding my breath on that. I don't expect that any such thing will happen.
Okay, I'd like to ask Mr. Odutson here, what is the cost of this action on your members? Have they been able to put the cost, what's the cost of damage like? You know, to their equipment, to infrastructure, to everything. And have you guys started powering up back? What has been the process like?
Well, Rufai, thank you very much. Well, I need not say more to what my brother had said. In terms of cost, it ran into billions. Again, the only point we need to make very clear to Nigerians is that this action and this act of impunity by the union and with the complacency of the government, who did not do anything when they knew that this was going to happen, it has now added to our woes. When we talk about liquidity crisis, when we talk about shortfalls, these are part of the things that have made the situation even worse, because the cost to us run into billions of naira. It's not about, it's not talking about maybe 2, 3, 4, 5, in excess of 10 billion naira, because a lot of things were affected by this action. And for those who use the common term, injury to one is injury to others, these are part of the level of impunity that we have descended into. While unions have the right to express their concern or embark on a strike, but in the case of a very sensitive sector such as this, I think we can do better than the way we're doing things.
Okay. Hey, Ekpo, let me come back to you. What do you think should be done to prevent the kind of situation that you have so eloquently condemned in the future? because what we've been told is that the strike has been suspended for 2 weeks. And Joe Ajero has been quoted saying that he hopes that government will act in good faith. What should government do? And what should government put in place to prevent what you think is an unsavory situation?
Hello.
One of them is as Attorney General of Cross River State between 2003 and 2007. The law has to be enforced. And I'm surprised that people like Joe Ajero are still walking our streets. Those people that we saw switching off transmission substations on video are still walking around hale and hearty when they have so badly affected the socioeconomic life of the nation. So at that level, I think something needs to be done about these people. And it has nothing to do with the correctness of the grievances that may have been aired on behalf of affected workers, which I deeply also respect. But at the same time, it is clear that the interests of our country and our people overrides those of a few hundred people who may be affected by the bad behavior or lack of it, or lack of good behavior on the part of TCN. So I'm not addressing that, the correctness of their position. I'm assuming that they actually have a good grievance, but what we are saying here is that they have gone to an extreme, which is totally untenable. Now, what should be done? I'm one of those who has advocated for quite a long time that we will never be well served as Nigeria, as a country of this diversity, of this size, by a single national grid. Indeed, Nigeria is an outlier when it comes to the way our power sector is structured, our market is designed. No country of Nigeria's size, of our diversity, of our huge population, has a single electricity grid. You have countries like India, like Russia, like China, like Brazil, like the United States of America, that have different power poles, different grids, managed by different operators, all interconnected. And so we must really begin to take another look. I think it is long, long overdue that we take another look at the way the Nigerian electricity market is structured. The market in the northern part of the country, in the northwestern part of the country, which has quite a lot of hydro resources, right, is very different in technical structure, economic outlook from the southwest, from the northeast. And you can certainly have a situation where TCN, which itself is divided into regions already, works on the basis of interconnected regional grids. Why you can't have those regional grids focused on those areas that they serve? There's no reason why we will not have a southwest grid, even a Lagos grid, a southeast grid, a northwest grid, a northeast grid. There's no reason at all why you can't have that. And if you have that, of course, your risk and exposure to the Ajeros of this world is a lot, it becomes a heavily minimized, a lot less than it would ordinarily be if we all depended on one single grid in which somebody could go to a substation in Katampe or in Ekpo and just turn something off and the whole country goes down. So from a so-called national security standpoint, and we've been told time and time again that TCN ought not to have been privatized or ought not to have been concessioned, or there should have been no private activity. I don't like to use the word privatized because I don't think that an entity like TCN should be, quote, privatized. I think that commercial activity should be brought into it. I think that, as it has happened in other places, concessions should be done for various parts of the grid. And there's nothing about national security that requires that, or that says that we can't do this. Because after all, let's think about it. Our fight against the people in the northwest and in the northeast who are terrorizing citizens we use equipment, defense articles that are procured from outside the country. The crude oil that we produce and sell and share money every month here in Abuja is produced by IOCs that are foreign controlled. So when we talk about national security, we have to be relative here. Is it better to have a single grid or to have a collection, a pool of grids across the country? I think the answer is beginning to speak for itself from what has happened, and it has been speaking for itself for quite a few years. So in terms of a solution, from a technical standpoint, I think we need to begin to look at Nigeria not as a single electricity market, but as a collection of electricity markets that are focused on the socioeconomic, the demographic, the technical characteristics of the various parts of the country. And so we should be talking about devolution of power, which is already, and when I say power here, I don't mean political power, Ruben, I mean electricity. We should be talking about devolution of electricity to the various states so that the states can begin to create their own markets. And I'm really glad, I should say, that the National Assembly has recognized this. The Senate has recently passed a bill which recognizes the fact of state electricity markets, and I think that's where we should begin to go to. So in terms of minimizing the risk of exposure to failures like this, even to those things that happen outside activities of the IGROs of this world, which is grid collapses, because no matter whether we have an IGRO or not, we still have grid collapses and the fact that they do occur. The exposure that we have to grid collapses, the risk of loss socially, economically from grid collapses will be a lot less reduced if we have the country devolved electricity-wise into various markets, states that set up their own markets, that come together to form regional power pools and deal with the issues that pertain to those particular parts of the country. So from a technical economic standpoint, I think we really need to begin to act to move faster on what has already, I should say, started in terms of the devolution of electricity responsibility from the federal government to the states. Federal government will still have responsibility for energy sold across borders, but many states can have their, well, I won't say many, perhaps quite a few states can have their own markets local to themselves that are insulated from the kind of damage that this kind of event that happened on Wednesday could cause to them if they have their own state markets that can be, if need be, isolated from what happens in the national grid.
Okay, I'll come to you, Mr. Sunday Oduto, real quickly, and let's even talk about the privatization and the power sector in general, and let's talk about this big elephant in the room, cost-reflective tariff. We're beginning to see that, and when the privatization process started, there were road shows being done, but no foreign entity will want to touch the Nigerian power sector with a long pole because of the issue of cost-reflective tariff. And with the inflation and the economic problem with Forex, and that's why you see that these power companies are defaulting. It's not a bad thing to take a bank loan in the first place to be able to invest in business. But when the environment is not conducive and becomes problematic, what do you say about this?
Well, the truth of the matter is that for anybody to invest in any sector or in any country, the issue of there are certain things that must be there. Number one, there must be regulatory consistency, or certainty of policies, and of course, the issue of tariff is very important. In the case of Nigeria, we have had tariff mismatch over the years, and we've been talking about this all along. You cannot continue to undersell a product and yet expect efficiency. Efficiency is tied to pricing. Okay, and once you know the landing cost of any product, then the issue of the selling price must relate to that landing cost. We cannot continue to pretend that all is well, and then the next thing we do is to continue to look for a soft touch target. In our own case, of course, GIPO is always the one that will be blamed, that everybody would see as the bad guy in the market, even though we know what the problem is. I mentioned the issue of alignment at the beginning of this discussion. There's a need to align the value chain, generation, transmission, distribution. So if you can generate 10,000 megawatts, you must be able to wield that 10,000 megawatts, and you must be able to distribute that 10,000 megawatts. That will be 10, 10, 10. There's misalignment all along. And when you talk about alignment, technical alignment and commercial alignment, then the issue of cost comes to it. So you cannot pretend as if cost does not matter. People need to know, Nigerians need to understand, and the government need to know and make it very clear that when it comes to electricity, we should not play politics with it. Let people know exactly what the cost is, and let us pay the true cost of electricity. So all of that things can come into it. The issue of reinvestment, the issue of all the underinvestment along the value chain, all those ones can be dealt with if the cost is right. So somebody coming from abroad to put his money into any sector and then you shut down, the national grid one day because you want to go on strike. What that means, like I said, the action of that one single day costed the DISCO 2.94 billion naira. That was the cost for what happened 2 days ago. Imagine that happening for 1 week or 5 days. We're practically shutting down the whole country. So the issue of cost is very important, and we cannot continue to pretend if a loaf of bread from the bakery costs 100 naira, you cannot be selling that bread for 60 naira. One day, the seller of that bread, the retailer of the bread, will now sell bread to you without nylon. So you now have naked bread on the street. So the issue of cost is something that we all need to look at and agree. When you hear our regulators increasing tariff, the way it is done, and people say, they have increased it. The truth is that right from the beginning, the process has been very flawed, especially when the what is stated in the rules are not followed in terms of what needs to be done and when. So the issue of manual review, for instance, we have had occasion in this country when it was not done for 3 years. You cannot continue to have that kind of system and then you expect to have a perfect electricity market. I need not say more. My brother, you have said a lot of things, and we align ourselves 100% with what he has said.
Okay, Ekpo, okay, you are still with us. I was going to ask you. Yes, I get the point you made about changing the, transmission process, doing something about the national grid and all of that. But this year alone, we've had about 10 cases of grid collapse, right? The latest one was a case of electricity employees turning off the feeder and putting all of us into darkness for 14 hours. Should there be penalties for grid collapse? And what should those penalties be? What should they look like? And is it possible to delink the crisis in the electricity sector from the crisis that we have seen in the education sector? ASU has been on strike for about 186 days. The aviation sector, there's also crisis there. In the health sector, there's also crisis there. And I raise this question again because I asked you earlier on whether, in fact, there are ways in which we can blame government for what is happening.
Okay, so Ruben, let me go back to the point your colleague made about the big elephant in the room. I don't think that the big elephant in the room is tariffs. It is not. Tariffs are a symptom of a larger problem. And the problem we have here is the way in which we have come to regard our electricity sector. It's historical. Our politicians, from time immemorial, have, when it comes to electricity, used a particular phrase. It is, we will give you electricity. We will give you light. And that conditions us into thinking that electricity is a right. Electricity is a manufactured product. The same way as Sunday pointed out, bread, Coca-Cola, Toma Pep, Milo, whatever it is, bottled water, is the result of a process of manufacture. And therefore, it has a cost. And if we want that product to be abundantly available and to grow with the size of our population, we have to pay for it. It's just a logical and straightforward fact that we accept in every other thing. Nigeria is a nation of traders and entrepreneurs. We're not socialists or communists in this country. So we understand the logic of the market. Every single village in Nigeria has a market, and no market survives if people who go to that market tell the stall holder, I want to buy your basket of tomatoes, which is 1,500 naira at 500 naira, give it to me for 500, and the government will pay you the remaining 1,000. Nobody does that. So why do we want to do it with electricity? I'm glad. I think that one of the best things, in quotes, to happen to our power sector is the cost of diesel. Because we now see that running generators, running our economy on diesel, which is what we've been doing for the last 30 or 40 years, is no longer productive. Diesel at 850 naira adds up to something like 220, 230 naira per kilowatt hour. So if a disco now comes to you and says, I will give you a steady supply of power with 100 naira per kilowatt hour tariff, we're not going to waste time. We'll take it. Yet we, the same people, if we had been told this just 3 months ago, would have told the disco to go to hell, and I would have said this is part of the problem that we have in the country. I'm not speaking for discos here. Sunday will do that very, very well. And indeed, I think that discos are also a part of the problem. But the reality is that we have a bigger issue, and that is the way we have managed policy and regulation in the country. That is the bigger elephant in the room. Investors did not want to come to Nigeria in 2012 when we started the privatization or restarted the privatization because of tariffs. No, that was not the point. It was policy flip-flops. We started privatization and talking about it in 2002. And then we stopped the process in 2003. We started it again when, in 2006, when the Power Sector Reform Act was passed, 2005, 2006. And then again, we stopped it again in 2007, presidential decision. So that back and forth, those flip-flops, and the people who engaged with us, I was part of that process in 2002. We went around the country with the then Vice President Atiku, and we sold the idea of coming into Nigeria and investing to quite a number of people. Companies like Aon, companies like Scottish Power, companies like RW were interested in this market, in coming in here, and they were ready to come to Nigeria. But of course, we started flip-flopping. So on one level, you have that. As Sunday has pointed out, you then have the other level where we say that regulators set tariffs. They don't set tariffs, they set methodologies. It is the job of the discos, which is another problem we have, but I don't want to go into that. It's the job of the discos to propose a tariff. And when tariffs are proposed, you have politicians saying that, oh, they speak for Nigerians, Nigerians will not pay. How do you know Nigerians will not pay? How do you know that? The cost of providing self-power to ourselves is a lot higher than any amount that you will ever be asked to pay for grid energy. But we are now finally beginning to see that because we are a generator-driven economy and the cost of diesel is through the roof. Now we know that grid energy is a lot cheaper than generator energy, but we have had almost 40 years of underinvestment in that grid. How do you make up for that loss? It's going to be very tough, but I hope that we can find a way to do it. And I think one of the ways to do it is to decentralize electricity and let states begin to create the markets, not get involved in it. And I want to say this very clearly, not for states to get involved, but for states to create the opportunity for investors to look at and address the issues of those states, which is a lot smaller than the national challenge. Now, to come to this question that you raised, around what can be done. I believe that, really what we should be looking at, and I'm not talking about blaming the government here. I think the government does have some responsibility, but at the end of the day, the issue with our electricity sector is one that is around the way it is structured, the way it is regulated, before we come to the question of tariffs. And if we do have some consistency in regulation, some consistency in policy making, and get the government out of that bottleneck, which is transmission, and allow the private sector to go in there, allow states to begin to create their own markets so that we can look at smaller units of the challenge than this big thing called Nigeria, then I think that we'll begin to have an opportunity to actually satisfy the demand for electricity in our country and not have to depend on generators, which is really not the way to run any economy at all.
Well, thank you very much, Ekpo. Thank you very much, Chief Sunday Odunton, for joining us on the morning show today.